Good morning, everyone. Thank you for logging in today to the webinar. Today we'll be going over the 40 and 50-year recertification process. For those of you that are here first time to a webinar by M2E, Eisinger, and Affinity, we look forward to providing you as much expert advice as we can today. We will be opening the Q&A. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the Q&A section. We'll do our best to answer most, if not all, of the questions as they relate to today's webinar. We will be getting started in just about 1 to 2 minutes. We're waiting for all the participants to log in. We have over 200 people who have requested to attend this webinar. Obviously, it's a very concerning topic with everything that has occurred at Champlain Towers. So we'll go over everything in just maybe about a minute or two, if you could give us a second for everyone to log in. And thank you again for attending today's webinar. All right, great. So the numbers are about getting steady, so I think we should get started. So first and foremost, I want to thank everyone that's here today on today's webinar. As I stated earlier, we will be going over the 40 and 50-year recertification process. We have, there's a lot of information with the news. They're doing the best that they can to break down what has occurred at Champlain Towers. However, M2E, Eisinger, as well as Affinity have decided to really bring in the experts and the experts that deal with condominium and homeowners associations on a daily basis and help clarify some of the things that are occurring. Also help clarify a lot of the questions that you may have with regards to the 40 and 50-year recertification. And lastly, also understand a little bit about what the requirements are for each county and how that breaks down. But before anything else, I do want to disclose that we are professionals and we're providing our professional opinion. If there's any particular concern or questions that you may have, we do strongly refer that you contact your attorney, contact your engineer or your professional management company to provide you guidance. Before we get started and give any introductions, I did want to take a moment to really pray for all those individuals who have lost their lives, for all those families who have lost ones. We understand that what occurred at Champlain, it's challenging and it's a tragedy more than anything else. And we're praying for them. Each of our organizations are doing something to be able to help them. And also, I wanted to thank those first responders that have been there, that have been sleeping at the site, that have come from all over the world, from Israel, to really support and really help our community out. And also all those companies that have done their own particular outreach, whether it's feeding the dogs or doing whatever they're doing to support the individuals that are supporting those families. I wanted to thank them on behalf of the 3 organizations. So as we get started, I wanted to allow each member to provide an introduction. And Alessandra, if you would be so kind to give a little introduction about yourself and the firm that you represent.
Sure. Thank you, Rafael, and thank you to Affinity for putting this together and for M2E for joining us as well. My name is Alessandra Stivelman. I'm a partner and shareholder at Eisinger Law. We are a full-service law firm, and our niche is representing condominium and homeowners associations. We're located in Hollywood, but we have offices and we service clients throughout the state. I'm really happy to be here to provide additional information to board members and members. I'm very big on education, as I know M2E and Affinity is as well. And just a quick legal disclaimer that, as much as we'll try to answer your questions, this is not to be deemed legal advice. And you really should contact your attorney for your association or your personal attorney if you have any specific legal questions. But hopefully we'll be able to assist and answer many of the questions that are out there. So
great, thank you so much, Alessandra. And next up is one of the industry experts, especially within our world of condominium and homeowners association, M2E, and we have the pleasure of having the president and owner of the organization, Misha. Misha, if you'd be so kind to speak a little bit about yourself and the firm and the work that you do for our community.
Thank you, Rafael. Thank you, Affinity and Eisinger, to organizing this. It's a pleasure to be in the company of industry expert, and I think that this particular seminar is there in order to both make the clients and our community understand the importance of experts in their field in what we're doing. My name is Misha. My last name is, as you can see, unpronounceable. I'm the president and owner of M2E Consulting Engineers, and I have been an engineer for too long. My firm is now in its 17th year. We are the most recognized, largest forensic engineering consulting firm in the Southeast. We have offices in Miami, West Palm Beach, Orlando, and Tampa. We serve the state and communities and condominium associations throughout the state, specifically in engineering-related matters, as this one is. It's a pleasure to be here, and I welcome any question that you might have.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Misha. As for us, my name is Rafael Aquino. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Affinity Management Services. We are a boutique management company who focuses their services on providing really that personal touch that our board members are looking for. We service both Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County. So any questions that you may have from a management perspective, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. But more importantly, we are looking to provide that information. And as Misha stated, really being the industry experts is provide a little bit of clarity with today's topic. So why don't we get started? And I think it would be great, Misha, if you could give our listeners a little bit of background on the 40-year recertification process, how it came about, and what are some of the basic kind of high-level 30,000 feet requirements of that 50-year process?
Very good, thank you. The 40 years of recertification process started in Miami-Dade County back in 1974, when a catastrophic collapse of an office building in downtown Miami had actually fatalities. It led the county to design what is today called the 40 years of recertification process, which was then adopted and started being implemented a year later in 1975. 30 years later, Broward County essentially copied or mirrored the process, and it's called, I believe, the Building Safety Inspection Program in Broward County. It is a mirror effect. It's essentially a mirror of what Miami-Dade has implemented, and a year later, 2006, it has been made effective. Palm Beach does not have any comparable program, which is kind of an aberration from both an engineering and life safety standpoint, because it's not like the wind or the hurricane would know to stop at the Broward to Palm Beach line and then not cross over, right? The process has been enforced through what I would gonna call kind of a blueprint, which is given to each engineer and or architect that needs to perform it. The forms are public and they are on the website of the county. Different municipalities have different formats, but it's essentially the same form. And the form need to be filled up by either an engineer or a registered architect. And on top of that, by an electrical engineer. When I say engineer, I meant structural engineer. So you can have a combination of structural engineer plus electrical engineer, or architect plus electrical engineer. My recommendation would be that if you live in a mid-rise, you would definitely want to have a structural engineer rather than an architect look at it on top of the electrical engineers. The intent is to essentially file a statement whereas the building is structurally and electrically sound. At the time that the program was designed, it was essentially assessed that the two biggest threats to human life would be the structural and electrical system. In the electrical system, don't think only about electrocution, but think about illumination, think about paths of exiting the building that are properly illuminated, think about electrocution, think about things like that. And think about low voltage systems that are life safety systems, such as a fire and smoke alarm system. On a structural standpoint, needless to say, the idea is to confirm that the structural elements of the building are sound to support the mass of the building for a certain time. So the certification goes 40 years and every 10 years after. The form is the same. So essentially you do it 40, 50, 60, and so on. And the same type and profile of professionals are expected to fill it up. The report is then filed with the municipality/county, and it starts essentially the clock ticking for the next 10 years after that.
Okay.
That's kind of as broad as I could possibly describe it. I think that the question that we often ask it is it the system, or is it the process, or is the people that are part of the process? And then we can expand on that in our discussion.
Sure, definitely. Thank you, Misha. And Alessandra, if you could give our listeners maybe the legal perspective of the 40, 50-year recertifications for, Dade and Broward. Obviously, Misha mentioned that Palm Beach unfortunately does not have it. But if you can kind of give us the legal perspective on that.
Sure, absolutely. So what I find is really important to take away from all this is that a lot of our association clients will wait until they receive the notice of required inspection from the county in order to start doing anything. And that's really when the timelines start ticking as far as the county is concerned. And it really, in my opinion, in my firm's opinion, this whole process should be starting a lot earlier. You shouldn't wait until you receive a notice. And the legal process is you receive the notice, and then, for instance, in Miami-Dade County, you have 90 days after you receive the notice to have the inspections completed. And then after that, you have 60 days to obtain the permits. And I believe it's about 150 days to complete the work. And realistically, that's just not doable, right? I mean, we all know with permits and with contracts and legal review and working with all the parties and getting everything and all the parties together, that's just an unreasonable timeline. Broward is essentially 90 days and then 180 days to complete repairs. It's similar, they mirror each other like Misha said, but there are specific timelines. And the problem is when you start it, when you receive that notice from the county, then you're already behind the game, because there's no way that you're going to be able to meet all those deadlines. So from the legal perspective, there's a lot that is involved. We obviously recommend, if you're going through the 40-year certification, you utilize your professionals, you reach out to a reputable engineering firm like M2E, you discuss the scope of the work, you make sure that management is involved in the decisions, you reach out to your attorney and you make sure you're complying with the legal requirements, that the attorney is reviewing the contract with and for any repair work that needs to be done, that we're making sure that there's timelines and that the association is protected during the process as well. So there's a lot of legal aspects that go into this 40-year, and I think we just throw the term out very broadly, and there's a lot more behind the scenes that goes into it.
Correct. And you bring up a great point, Alessandra. It's so important to really have strong partnerships, especially going through this process. And you're bringing up the timelines. I mean, waiting to get that letter, it really doesn't, it just actually causes more delays. I know Misha will touch up on a little bit earlier of how we could take some preventative work. But either way, just think about having to coordinate of the selection of the engineer and going through that process. So, I want to pose this question to you, Misha, because I know we get asked a lot from our board members, and obviously we have organizations such as yourselves that we work with, but there are a lot of self-managed communities such as Champlain that aren't too sure board members of what the process they need to go through. And that process, let's say, of selecting an engineer, which is a process that they should be considering, especially if they're a building of 5 stories as above, as what the recommendation have been thus far. So what steps do you believe either board members or managers should be taking in order to select a qualified engineer that's experienced to do the kind of work that the counties are now requiring, both for now as well as for the 40 and 50-year process?
I would like to reflect on Alessandra brought very well what is written on paper, and I guess we are here as leaders in our field by telling you what is really happening in the field as opposed to what is written, right? On a strategic level, the county and the municipalities would like to have a piece of paper done by a qualified professional that says that an asset is fine. Therefore, although these paper days are on there, we have been witness of multiple postponement of those dates, because a board would say, I promise I'm going to hire an engineer by day X, and then the city or says, well, then tell me who the engineer is, I want to meet with them, and then I need a plan of action within 90 days. And they will keep postponing it until actually work starts. assuming that there is no threat to life or property at the time, so that the building is essentially structurally sound. So those dates are kind of, I'm not going to say negotiable, but flexible, particularly if in the scenario that Alessandra just described, which is the first time they learn about the 40 years research is when they got the letter. One of the discussion that is currently at the county level is that the 40 years ratification may start at 30 years. In other words, at the 30 year, I'm going to wave at you and say you have 10 years to fix it. That means that it will give you ample time to raise funds, assess, go to get a loan, get an engineer, do whatever it is that you need to do. And it essentially would mean that there is no excuse that in 10 years you didn't have time to do what you were supposed to do. That's one of the things that is on the table now. I think that how do you get to a qualified engineer? And this is part of the discussion of who are the players. Is it the process or is it the players? Boards, as we all know, are under tremendous pressure to limit expenses so that they're not reflected on the maintenance fees of their constituents. And boards sometimes run on the premise of, I will give you better management or better control of stuff while not increasing maintenance.
Yeah.
And it's a slippery slide because buildings, and I know you heard that at least 74 times, Rafael, and you also, Alessandra, are very much like people. Either you go to the gym and you eat a lot of vegetables and you will be in very good shape even in your 60s, or you only have Coke and fries and fried foods for your life, and you get a coronary when you're 20. There is a reasoning to the more you invest over time, the less you will have to do once that those notice are issued. Essentially, what makes a lot of sense is if you eat your vegetables, which is painting your building regularly, injecting all the stucco cracks, watching for atypical or structural cracks that would be either ejected or analyzed by an engineer, so that over time they don't develop to the point that by the time that you are 40, the building is already in a pre-coronary stage, and we're talking about millions of dollars to just put it in reasonable health. So how do you find that elusive engineer? I think that you rely on reputation rather than price. And there is, believe it or not, maybe half a dozen of reputable engineers in our marketplace that don't mind telling the board what they don't want to hear. And I think that if you're a board who wants the engineer to tell that everything is fine and for $2,000 they will sign a statement that says so and the problem goes away, while at the same time your own owners, as we have witnessed in Surfside, tell you of failing stucco and of broken and separating concrete, then you will not get that engineer, because you're not shopping for a solution, you're shopping for the best price that is going to make you go, that is going to make the problem go away, so that the problem becomes the problem of the next board.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
If I can comment on that, Misha, going with your analogy, I think it's really important to remember that just because you may have your annual checkup at the doctor's or your annual oil change for your car doesn't mean that if you're not feeling well, you don't go into the doctor and find out why. Right. To the same extent that just because you're required to do the 40-year doesn't mean that if you see something prior, you shouldn't be getting that addressed and repaired. So, that goes hand in hand. And I think a lot of times, the main obstacles that I see in getting this done and what's keeping this is a lot of the politics within boards. And at the end of the day, one of the questions that we got on the chat was whether an association can request that all the owners pay for the repairs. Well, yes. I mean, an association, going back to basics, is a not-for-profit corporation that creates a budget. if the budget doesn't, and the budget has to be adopted with 100% reserves, the board then decides whether to allow the owners to waive those reserves, either partially or fully. The owners don't have to waive reserves. The board doesn't have to provide that option. So arguably, the goal would be to have reserves so that when you do have to repair something, you have the funds there. However, it goes beyond that, because now that you know you have to do work, you may have a financial issue. You may have to specially assess because maybe you didn't budget, or maybe the owners did waive the reserves. And so you have to look at your governing documents to see whether or not you need unit owner approval to specially assess. If you do, what is that percentage? Whether or not, if you're going to take a loan, whether your building is in a condition where a bank will lend to your association, and there's a lot of factors that are included there, and whether or not you need unit owner approval to take out a loan. A lot of obstacles that come in, because at the end of the day, if a board decides to do this, and what I see very often is a board will determine that they need to pass a special assessment, that there's work that needs to be done. And the minute it gets done, or right before, you'll see owners that are just not happy about the fact that there's a special assessment. And so they oust that board either by a recall or by an election. And then you have a new board that's trying to band-aid the issues. And maybe you don't go to the doctor, maybe you just take some Tylenol and make it go away temporarily. And I think that that's the main issue, because then that's when the can gets kicked down the road. And now you have a board that maybe comes in a year or two later, has all this information that has been done and doesn't understand why no one has acted on it. And now the cost of the repairs or the engineering proposal has increased because you've waited 4 or 5 years to do what you needed to do back then. There's always a consequence to the waiting.
Correct. And from a management side, we see it all the time. When we take on a new building, and you'll see, and I say new building and new association, I should say, and it has its age. And it's a shame, because many of the times all it needed to be done is what we were talking about during our discussion, was just painting the building, just going through that normal process of following the guidelines of 5 to 7 years, depending on the paint, where the building is located and so forth. You'll find that your costs are going to be much less than having to go through a restoration project where you've just let things go. You've had no preventative maintenance. You've waited 10 plus years to do anything because, I got my 40-year recertification. I'll go ahead and handle that at that time. And then you realize that really, the now everyone's learning what the word spall is, even though for our industry, it's been very common for years. You've let the rebar spall to an area where now they have to go and chip significantly much more than they would have had if you would have just stayed on a routine kind of project. And it's a difficult thing for board members. What we experience is, yes, there is sometimes a lot of, kicking the can down the road, but then there's times where you get boards, as you stated, Alessandra, where they want to do the right thing, but then they're fearful of what's going to come. But at the end of the day, as a board, you have a fiduciary responsibility to uphold, and enhance the property, but also uphold the safety for the residents that reside in that condo or HOA, whatever it may be. So, I'm happy that you brought up the whole thing about the reserves, because many times boards feel, well, we're going to present the reserves and we're going to give the option to waive. As a board, you don't have to give the option to waive. You could make that business decision. In my experience, I've seen that you're going to hear the kicking and screaming for the couple of months once you approve it. But after that, it fades away, especially if you provided factual information to your residents. If you had an engineer do your reserve study, you have a reserve study, and you could provide that information to your residents, letting them know this is why we're making this business decision, then it makes it a little bit more, it gives it a little bit more appetite for them to say, okay, I understand they're doing what's right for our community.
Yeah. I think communication is critical.
Right.
When it comes to monetary issues and construction issues and life safety issues. I mean, the owners need to understand why the association or the board has decided to do what they have. And with communication comes understanding and comes acceptance. But
Right.
A lot of the issues I see is when there is no communication and the owners get caught off guard with a special assessment. They don't understand the legalese, the terminology used, and they feel like something isn't right. And then they start investigating, they create additional fees for the association. Now you're dealing with record inspection requests, with potential litigation, when you could have just avoided all that by being transparent from day one.
Yeah, and proactive. Exactly. Now, Misha, I know, over the past week or so that it's been, we've received a lot of calls. What's the average, cost of a restoration project? And I know that could be, all across the spectrum. But if you can kind of give our listeners today of what's the associated cost with some of these 40, 50-year recertifications.
Um, I'll give you the only accurate answer, which is it depends.
Yeah.
That's
Alessandra's
actually my answer.
And the reason is the following: buildings have different geometry and have been differently maintained. As you have seen from the document of the champion, the fact that they waited from 2018 to now escalated the cost from I believe 9 or 9 or 11 to 15, $16 million.
Correct.
So that's the cost of waiting. If a building is properly maintained, which means that it has been painted and restuccoed as needed over the period. When you do a paint job, it's really paint and stucco, particularly in a coastal environment. So if it is properly maintained every 5 to 7 years, then you shouldn't get a sticker shock, whatever that means. Because again, you're asking me for a 50-story high-rise versus a 6-story mid-rise. So whatever the scale of that is, there shouldn't be a sticker shock. The sticker shock occurs in what Alessandra was saying by boards kicking the can down the road for 40 years. And then essentially nobody even knows who was at that first board meeting when an engineer said something was bad. The sad epilogue is that we warned board members about these situations all the time. Alessandra, her firm, myself, my firm, reputable engineers and attorneys and management companies. It is sad that we had to come to this tragic outcome for people to actually go and say, that's what they meant.
Right.
When
Correct.
we go into building and we see that they actually painted over exposed rebar so that it looks like the concrete did not delaminate. Wow. And we tell them that there is no band-aid for that, only to be replaced by an engineer who is going to tell them, let me write something about it. We have both a reputation and a significant E&O insurance. We're not risking our professional reputation and livelihood to tell somebody that they are fine. A company that would be, I guess, less prominent or with no insurance has less to lose.
Correct.
And he or she may need that job to survive.
Correct. And we see that all the time. We get asked, oh, well, why is this engineering when we're comparing, engineering firms? Why is this price compared to that price? And we try to give the example of it's hiring someone that knows what they're doing compared to someone that's an expert in their field. And more importantly, I want to provide a little bit of point of clarification, because I'm sure it happens to you, Misha, when you're providing your proposals. There's two different ways that buildings can decide to at least get the initial assessment. And correct me wherever I'm wrong, Misha. There's the inspection where the engineer is doing their general inspection of the building. They're using binoculars. They're doing their best to be able to see what's going on. There's not a problem with that. They're going to give you, specs on what the job is going to look like. We always try to recommend to our boards to do a little bit more discovery. Once you feel comfortable with the engineer that you've selected, and it's an expert in our industry, I always strongly urge, if you're concerned about costs and you don't want these change orders, then do the discovery process. Have the engineers set up swing stages, have them set up scaffolds depending on your building, have them, investigate every little corner that they're going to investigate so that you could get very close to the actual figure of what the cost is going to be. And that way you can represent that number to your residents. Because many times they'll go, no, I just want to do the basic report, but the engineer is still going to, or should be, supervising the project to sign off the expense of what the contractor is requesting. At that point is when the engineer is doing their full in-depth analysis. And that's where they want to point the fingers, oh, the engineer mispriced it, or the contractor is giving me all these change orders. But the reality is that no one was able to do an in-depth analysis of what was occurring, or what is occurring, I should say, with that particular building. And when you look at the cost, right, when you're able to know, okay, this is what the engineer charged me extra, because we've seen both experiences, it's very minimal compared to what the change orders are when you don't go through that option. I mean, that's been our experience. It's always an uphill battle, you know, and then we're caught in the middle of who's right, who's wrong, and we're having to, you know, guide the board. But, you know, I want to bring up that point because I know many times boards are very hesitant, and it's a shame because, you know, you'll know very close to what that number is if you do that additional step of having them really set up the building. Alessandra, I think you wanted to add something to that.
So, and I'm trying to answer some questions as we go along. Hopefully that's okay. But one of the things that came up, I think from a fellow manager, is that what do you do when the board just doesn't listen, right? When you have the engineer, you have the proposals, they think it's too much money, when you have management saying, no, send it to your attorney or do it, what do you do? And you know, all we can advise is that education and communication and bringing in the experts is really important. You may want to remind the board members, like you said, Rafael, they have a fiduciary duty. That means that they have to act in the best interest of the association. They have a duty of care, a duty to provide safety. And if they are breaching that duty and obtaining a benefit, or if they're failing to comply with their duty, then they can be sued for breach of fiduciary duty. Now, how does a board member protect themselves from that? They use their business judgment. It's a business judgment rule. And how do you prove that you used your business judgment is to rely on the advice of your professionals. If you went to your engineer and the engineer recommended XYZ and the board did XYZ, then you have used your business judgment because you're doing what the engineer recommended. If your manager is recommending something and legal's recommending something, and now you decide, and you don't always have to do what they say, but if you're not utilizing the advice of your professionals and you're going completely against what they say, then, you know, that should be a call for help for the owners in the community. There should be transparency. And, you know, as a manager, if you're not getting a response, bring in the attorney, bring in the engineer, have the board members attend the educational courses that we all put out. We do it because it's important and because to us, it's really critical that the board members be educated. They need to understand the consequences of their actions. They need to understand who to rely upon. And a lot of them, at the end of the day, you know, you guys that are out there that are board members, you're lay people. You're not engineers. You're not attorneys. You're not managers. You may not know what these requirements are. So you want to make sure that you have the professionals that can guide you on a step-by-step basis. You know, when you have a project, what do I need to do first? I mean, to a lot of people, this is so overwhelming, and understandably, because it's completely outside of their scope of their day-to-day lives. But it is so important that this is where you don't want to skim on the price tag. You know, you wouldn't do that with your doctors. You wouldn't do that with your, if it was, you know, your personal home, a single family home, you wouldn't skimp out if you felt that it would put you at danger. So you shouldn't do that when it comes to the structural integrity of a condominium either.
Excellent. And that brings me to, go ahead, Misha, sorry.
I think that you brought up two things and I kind of separated them in my mind. One is what is there to be done that is not 40 years of certification? And the answer is you can have periodic inspections of the structure and have an engineer just tell you that you're fine. Ideally, the same engineer so that you could have a continuity. In the avalanche of requests that we got, as you can only imagine, in the last couple of weeks, we have actually buildings who want to have a yearly contract with us to come and yearly document the condition of the building and update it. We have actually done that on an existing structure previously that was worried about a new building being built next door, and we actually put crack measuring tapes on existing cracks to see whether the cracks expand, and we had the before and after monitoring. So this is nothing unusual today in today's technology. We have even an in-house drone department that can document the exterior in detail. So it's not something that is what it used to be. I need to spend 7 days doing X and Y. So what can you do? You could have a regular checkup, like to Alessandra's. You go to the dentist not only when you need a root canal, but to clean your teeth, right? and you go for a checkup, not because you're about to have a coronary, because you want to have a clean bill of health. So that's one thing. As far as investigation, which is what you asked, I think, what would be the intelligent investigation and how does the price drive that? I have an as-built experience of a condominium on Key Biscayne that was quoted $2 million for repairs based on only a limited amount of sampling. And what we recommend is that they spend $20,000 in doing a more significant sampling of the balconies. And sure enough, the previous engineer looked at the worst case condition and then extrapolated that to the whole building. Well, that was not the case in the vast majority. And we estimated that the building could be done for half the price, $1 million. So $20,000 bought you $1 million of savings, right? Subsequently, the actual condominium came actually even under the initial budget, and they were super safe. The next building had the same thing, and they immediately went to us based on the experience of the previous building, and we made that building come on time and on budget. The third building of the complex chose us to use an engineer who worked on percentage of the cost of construction, which in itself is kind of, counterintuitive, because why would he have any incentive to control the cost if his fee is a percentage of it? Yeah. You have only one guess at how much their cost was, $2 million. So you get what you paid for. It's the simple answer to what we are saying. Whenever we make a presentation, and I'm quite blunt about it, I ask the board, if price is going to be the only consideration, then I prefer not to present.
Correct.
Because I know that there is people who are going to be cheaper than me, because they just don't have the girth of experience. The people that we employ are expert in their fields. They know what they're doing. They are paid decent wages, and as such, it's reflected in the cost of our services, right? Yeah. Our
Correct.
services, engineering services. I want this. If there is one thing that I would like everybody on the call to remember, this is this slide. Our services are an order of magnitude less than cost of construction.
Excellent
in
point.
plain language, if we are $100,000, then construction is $1 million.
Yeah.
If we are $20,000, that's $200,000 of construction. You can save only on one of those two.
Yeah.
Not on both. Do you save on the fee of the engineer or on the control of the construction?
Correct.
Because on a $2 million job, if you don't spend $200,000 to properly design and control that, you may spend $100,000 or $50,000, and in your mind, you saved $150,000. The lack of control will cause the cost to escalate to $2.5 million.
Yeah. Correct.
To a second assessment. We have been on the receiving end. A family member owned a condominium in Hallandale, and of course, family dinners. I'm the expert at the table. Well, our building. What do you think the thing should cost, right? And so, knowing the building, I gave a shooting from the hip number that was double the price that was quoted by the general contractor. And so I told our family friend, be prepared for a second assessment within a year, because there is no way that the building of that age in that condition will cost this much.
Yep.
And the specifications of the engineer essentially made it an open-end contract for the contractor, because the way they specified the repair was so restrictive that anything over and above that was a change order.
Of course.
And that goes, Misha, to why these contracts need to be reviewed by legal, why the association needs to make sure that they really understand what they're entering into, if it is an open-ended contract or not, and to ensure that if your GC who's doing this work is going to be subcontracting, to make sure that, now we can get into construction law, right? Make sure that you're getting the partial releases, make sure that you're getting the proper permits to do all this work, because at the end of the day, the money, as Misha said, that you're going to save by not doing it right, you're going to end up paying twofold, if not more, by paying the consequences of a not so proper job. And, I see it on a daily basis. You get what you
Yeah.
pay for when it comes to management, engineers, and attorneys. You get all calibers, but you want to get the professionals. You want to make sure that you're talking to someone that knows what they're doing, that this is not their first time around.
Correct. And an important key to also keep in mind is, we keep saying similar things, it's the partnerships and the industry experts. And it's important to keep that in mind, but also with what occurred last week, it's going to open a lot of buyers' eyes as well, of what to look for in a building. Now you're having everyone using social media to basically advise, these are the issues that my building is having. And this could be a negative consequence to certain buildings. And really, it's not anyone's fault, but the direction, the leadership that was at that time of managing the building. So now, hopefully, there's a change, right? Sometimes from tragedy, you get very positive, like what Misha mentioned of requiring a 30-year notice. I think that's amazing. It's going to put more boards on notice if there's board changes. But now board members hopefully will be more aware of, instead of fixing the lobby, let's fix the building first. I understand where board members come over. Let's just show the owners what we're doing and they'll be happy and we can keep fees the way that they are. But the reality is that what's more important, again, it's making sure that the safety of the building is number one, because that's your fiduciary responsibility as a board member. So it's important that board members and managers alike are really, putting these issues up to light, letting the board members know, for those board members that aren't as active. So with that said, I kind of want to switch gears a little bit and kind of break down the roles of both board members and the professionals. Maybe Alessandra, you could touch the board members, and I'll have Misha touch the professionals of what the responsibilities are when going through a 40 and 50-year recertification.
Sure. So I think we can start with a very simple concept of every decision that the board makes, unless it falls under the two very specific categories where it could be at a closed meeting, should be done at an open board meeting. The membership should know what you're considering. The board should obtain different bids. I think there was a question here that I see Misha is responding to as to what is considered a qualified engineer, and shouldn't the local authorities have a little bit more oversight of it? But the reality is that you guys as the board members have, the world at your fingertips per se. You have unfortunately, there are not that many qualified engineers, but you have the handful or the 12 legitimate engineers in Florida that know how to do a 40-year certification. Go with those engineers. Don't go with the engineer that's never done it before or that's willing to write what you need them to write, because at the end of the day, that defeats the whole purpose of the process. So the board needs to select an engineer. The board needs to take a look at their finances. They need to determine, if I'm going to need a special assessment, how do I get that? If I'm going to need a loan, what are the obstacles here? How long is this going to take? How do we plan for it? Do we have reserves? I mean, it's such a much bigger picture. So once the board realizes, because at the end of the day, the board is the body that runs the association. You have management to advise, you have legal, you have the engineers, but the board makes the decisions. So the board members at a board meeting discuss, let's get an engineer, you get some proposals, you meet with the engineer, you feel comfortable, you send that contract over to legal reviews the contract, you hire the engineer, they do your 40-year report, you determine what items need to be fixed, then you go through the same process again for your contractors. Maybe the engineer can recommend someone. It's very important that during the actual repair work, you have someone that's going to be overseeing the work. I can't say how many times I see where they just expect management, who are not project managers, they're not engineers, they're not architects, to be the one to ensure that the contractor is actually doing what the scope of work says that they're supposed to do. And in my opinion, that's just too, you should rely on the project managers, the engineers, not the property managers, because the property managers, that's not their job. Just like as an attorney, I can't go onto your property and tell you whether they did a good job with the concrete restoration, because that's not my field. So you need to make sure that you have the proper steps set up during the process, from project manager, the role of management in the project, and depending on the manager themselves and their experience and the company, that will vary depending on what they've agreed to do. You have legal involved to make sure to guide you through all the steps. You discuss with your engineers. And then most importantly, you make sure that you're doing this in the open. You do it, if there's no pending or proposed litigation, you're transparent in your decisions, because if you start talking about it in advance, by the time you get to the point where now you need to fund those repairs, the owners are expecting it. It doesn't come as a surprise. And then maybe you can even break it up if you start early enough. And you know that that engineering report said you're going to need to do $2 million in repairs approximately, but you don't have to do it right away. You can start collecting the funds. Maybe you discuss with the engineer what is more time sensitive, what is critical. And then you figure out a plan. But all of this involves communication. It shouldn't be a decision by one individual on the board. It shouldn't be a decision by the manager. And it certainly shouldn't be the engineer or legal that decides that. It's a board decision. The majority of the board needs to get together, understand everything, and then vote on how to proceed.
Correct. No, you bring up some excellent points, and I appreciate you identifying from a management perspective of boards wanting to push that responsibility to management, which in most cases, if you're working with a real strong management company, they're going to tell you right out of the gate, that's not something that I do. You need to hire an engineer or a project manager, someone to look over this project, because we have our day-to-day that we're doing as an organization and having to tack on that responsibility. I do know some management companies that will bring in another staff member, make an additional X amount of income and have someone managing the project. That's not something that we would recommend, because ultimately what you want is an engineer, a professional. We keep saying an industry expert that can identify what the challenges are. The manager can meet with them, discuss what are the coordination, what needs to be done, how is legal going to be involved, and being able to coordinate and facilitate that process. So,
I've seen some great managers, Rafael, from Affinity too, that would make great project managers, but that's not their role at the property. And if they were to do that, everything else will fall through the cracks.
Correct. Excellent. And Misha, from the professional side of the professionals, maybe if you could give, I'm going to load the question a little bit because of your expertise, but if you could give a little bit about the professional side, how the engineer is involved in the 40-year, and then maybe give a little touch on what the county requirements are, because the news has mentioned that an engineer needs to be hired within a month, or your building needs to be surveyed. There isn't, at least that I'm aware of, much clarity. Maybe if you could provide a little bit more clarity when it comes to that.
There is a lot of reaction and reactive action to the current conditions for a good reason. Essentially, now that this have occurred, then everybody is extremely cautious about what they're going to say, or they're going to write. The example of the condominium in North Miami Beach is an example where everybody was sitting on a report since January, and until the audit discovered that nobody read it, everybody went like, "What do you mean?" The point is that if there is, and to Alessandra's point, if there is proper communication, and again, if you remember, one of the couple of things that are important is trust your professionals, and don't try them to play roles that they're not really hired and responsible for. If you ask your manager to play project manager for a concrete restoration job, you are putting that manager, his company, in danger, because that's not what he has been trained and hired to do. Your perception that you're going to save money because you don't have an engineer / project manager is going to essentially bring risk to the condominium. The emphasis on cost is what has brought us to where we are today, which is why we have this entire seminar about. If there is transparency and understanding what the consequences of one's action are, which is what Alessandra was saying, then you would go and you would say, we are a building that is X amount of years old. Did we eat our vegetables? Yes, no, right? Fork in the road. When are we going to start? How much do the vegetable cost? What can we afford? Let's hire a professional, and basically the professional can say, well, you don't have to have all your vegetables in one day. How about you do carrots on Monday, then you do green peas on Wednesday and stuff like that. So we, as engineers, are not there to tell you everybody is in danger if you don't spend $10 million by Tuesday. we are there as your professionals who are going to tell you, these are the things that need to be done within a month. Those are the things that we can do for 6 months. And so now that this process is overall going to cost 1 year, at the end of 1 year, we can accomplish this. And that's what a seasoned professional, reputable professional have told you. The idea is not to create either an atmosphere of panic that everything is going to be really bad if something drastic is not done by X, nor to say that everything is going to be fine, just kick the can down the road.
Yeah.
The issue of what Alessandra has brought about, do you need a special license to do this? Unfortunately, the DBPR, which is who regulates us, says a licensed engineer. You can be a licensed engineer after working X amount of years in design, and somebody signs it. So you are 4 years out of college and you can do a 40 years recertification. Do you want that person to do your certification? Not necessarily. Do your homework. Unfortunately, there is no substitute for that. The very able and professional management companies like Affinity can help you in identify the half a dozen or so truly professionals in the field. Try to evade any relation to, oh, I heard about this guy who can do it for $2,000. And I think that the fact that you would do your homework, or this you can ask your management company, we would like to have a list of references that we would like to personally meet with the board members who have used their services over the last 5 years. Because if somebody says that they did 50 or 20, 40-year recertification on their website, doesn't make it through.
Excellent.
Fair enough?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, so I think that part of finding the reputable person is really an investigative effort that needs to be conducted by the association with the help of their manager and attorneys.
Correct. No, definitely excellent points. And again, you see it across all industries, from engineering, from management, from a legal perspective. And Misha, let me stay here with you, because I have this question comes up a lot, is why do you believe that some board members or associations don't want to comply with what the engineer recommends?
Money.
Money. That's money.
Yeah.
And I don't know, there is the famous saying, a little knowledge is dangerous sometimes, right?
Yeah.
I'm thinking that Alessandra would concur that the board members who have a retired contractor or engineer on board are really the most difficult, because he or she will tell you that 25 years ago, when they were building buildings in Chicago, this was not required, and I don't know why you're spending all this money, to the applause of the rest of the board.
Well, back then kids didn't wear car seats either.
Right.
Yeah.
So the only reason why they don't want to believe is because there is somebody like that either in their constituents. We are about to start in a prominent high-rise in Sunny Isles, the actual restoration. The assessment has been passed, and we're still having meetings in explaining to reluctant people why it is that it needs to be done. So the battle doesn't cease, because you have new buyers who come on who go like, oh, I didn't think that this is going to happen. I thought this building was relatively new, blah, blah, blah. And we go, it is necessary. So we go through town halls, 30, 40, 60, 70, 80, 100 people explaining over and over the same thing. And again, hearing, well, do we really need it? Why can't you just remove the waterproofing over these 6 square feet of pool deck and leave the rest of it alone?
Misha, I'm sure you get it all the time. Everyone's an engineer, everyone's an attorney, everyone knows a cheaper, better, quicker way to do it. And I think that's really the issue. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it's what we see. And it's the fact that you have these board members that are trying to explain to their constituents what's going on, bringing in the professionals, doing these town halls, doing these newsletters and email blasts. And at the end of the day, a lot of these owners maybe are just not invested in the long term in their building. Maybe they intend to sell. They don't want to be stuck with a special assessment. They didn't plan on it. I mean, Unfortunately, a lot of condominiums in South Florida, the constituents cannot afford what it's going to take in order to repair the buildings. And I think we're going to see a lot of the fallback from that as to what is the next step. What happens with the North Miami building that was evacuated? How much is it going to take to repair that? And are those individuals going to be able to afford those special assessments? And if not, what do you do? Do you terminate the condominium? Do you have investors and buy all the units and knock it down? Do you actually do the repairs? And these are all things that, and questions that are coming up in our industries that we're going to have to address in the future.
No, those are very big questions that are going to need to be answered. And I'm hoping that it just doesn't fade away. Because it's always been an issue. And as you stated, Alessandra, Money, as well as Misha, these buildings weren't just built. They were built 40 years ago. So if there was something in place where they are allowed, or they're required, I should say, to put reserves, because allowed, it does exist, it's required, that doesn't exist, required to put reserves in place from the day they were built, we wouldn't find ourselves, in this position. And I know that gets a little hairy because people are, well, if we want to make our decisions, we should have the right to do what we want to do. But depending on the building, look at Surfside, you have a lot of residents that were already in their golden years. Okay, they're on fixed incomes, and maybe they shouldn't have been in those units, because if you can't afford it at that point, what do? So the boards are then put into very difficult positions where it's hard to make a decision, because these are your neighbors. And these are people you care for, and in some cases or some instances you love. So how do you tell a resident, hey, by the way, you have to pass a $433,000 per unit special assessment? The decision needs to be made as a board. That should not hold you back. But the reality and the complexity of the issue is that these are not volunteers. And while most artists are great leaders, it's difficult to make that decision because those are your neighbors. You're going to need to see them every day. Yeah. But unfortunately, that is the reality, and those are the decisions that you have to make. So I'm hopeful, even though I know it's very difficult, because I'll say it. There's the developers have their own foothold with the lobbyists and so forth to control what they can be able to do. But these are decisions that need to happen. HOAs have an ability of charging a resale contribution on the sale of a unit, and if it's in their docs for full clarity. Mm-hmm. If condos had something like that, maybe that's at least some kind of income in the interim when there's a change of ownership or a change of hands. But, if there's so many associations with very minimal reserves, and they're put into these positions where eventually they're going to get a loan, and that loan is never going to end, because after they paid off that loan, there's another restoration that needs to come, and it'll continue and continue.
Rafael, I think a lot of the issues arise from this misunderstanding as to how a condominium is operated. Yeah. They think, well, I bought my unit, I'm not worried about the structural component. That's the association's job. But they don't understand that the association and the board members are managing the money that you're paying and your assessments. And at the end of the day, whether the association pays for it or the owners pay for it, the owners are paying for it, right? I mean, as an owner, whether it's the money's in reserves or they specially assess or you're paying back a loan, you're paying your percentage interest based. When you own a unit in a condominium, you own the unit and the percentage common expenses and shares associated with your unit, the common elements. So even though the association is responsible for maintaining it, you're responsible for paying the cost of it, whether it be by virtue of reserves, special assessment, assessments, planning. And one thing that I think is really important that owners understand is you elect your board, right? At the end of the day, you're not happy with how the board is running your association. You have remedies, and you as an owner have an interest in your property and in the well-being of your community. You need to attend those board meetings. You need to be involved and know what's going on. It's really easy to say that you don't agree or that you don't want to pay, but you haven't actually been to the meetings to know what happened. Why was that decision made? And ignorance is bliss, right? So a lot of owners come and they come to these town halls. Maybe they'll come to the 5th or 6th, but they missed the whole initial conversation about it. And they're already fighting about how could you decide this? But that was done 2 years ago.
Correct.
You were invited and you didn't attend. And
correct.
That creates a lot of the issues, is the misunderstanding and the misconceptions as to who's responsible for what and how much power we as owners have in electing our board and having a say of how our community is run.
Correct. Excellent point. I want to get a question here. I know you both of you have done an amazing job responding to the questions that have been popping up, but I do have one here that's pretty simple for you, Misha. When it comes to the electrical repairs for the association of the 40-year recertification, what does the 40-year recertification encompass on the electrical side?
It's essentially the electrical system themselves, specifically the ones that are important for life safety. So general electrical systems, grounding, lighting protection if there is one or not, if there is a generator or not. It doesn't say how, just yes, no, does it have it? Smoke and fire alarm system, yes, no. Overall quality and type of the wiring, copper, aluminum, and we typically also inspect what we consider life safety issues, such as are the receptacles in the wet areas GFCI. As you know, the code has changed, so the bedrooms now have to have arc fault interrupt receptacles, but not only bedrooms, but also areas of circulation in the condominium. It used to be only bedrooms up to, I think, the 70s. And before that, not even that. So with the changing code requirements, we make sure that we observe correctly, specifically life safety issues in the condominium itself. We look at the panel boards and switchgear, whether there is signs of arcing, of overheating, the transformers and everything that goes part with it. There is a brief description of the system that we do when we inspect it, so that there is a comprehensive, not only assessment, but description of the system, so that 10 years later, somebody looking at that would see what we saw and what was done about it. A new requirement was added fairly recently, I don't know when exactly, which is the level of illumination in the parking, in the outdoor approach area, specifically in order to avoid, I guess, liability and or crime. So you actually need to have a engineer certified point-by-point illumination plan being done as part of the electrical recertification.
Excellent. Thank you, Misha. So in respect for both of your time as well as our listeners, I think we've gone through all the pertinent questions. Any questions that we may have not answered, please feel free to reach out to one of us, and we'll be happy to help you as we can. Any closing remarks, Alessandra, with regards to today's webinar, or any tips that you want to provide to our listeners today as we wrap up?
Sure. Just wanted to thank you guys again, Affinity, M2E. We are Eisinger Law. We're really big on education. Like I said, at the end of the day, it comes down to understanding the requirements. So I urge all of you guys out there, this was 1 hour. There's so much to talk about, so much information that we can give you guys, so much guidance that we as experts have. And, attend these seminars, whether in person, via Zoom, read from reputable sources, take a look at the statutes, look to see what's going on. Knowledge is power. We're here to assist. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. And hopefully we can avoid the tragedy that happened by virtue of education and being proactive rather than reactive. So
thank you so much, Alessandra. Misha, any closing remarks or tips?
Well, tips, I don't know. I gave already a couple of my main hot topics. My point is that these seminars sometimes have a connotation of shameless propaganda on behalf of the participants, and I hope that whomever attended this one understood that we are here as experts in our fields in order to hopefully avoid what has just happened in our community. I drove by the site yesterday and I had a knot in my stomach because I had the feeling that if everybody would have done what they were supposed to do, lives could have been saved. And having the burden that members of my professional family might have contributed to that really keeps me up at night. So my recommendation is when you are a board member, when you're a manager, think about not only the short term, but the long-term well-being of the people that are among you and your community. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Rafael, for organizing, and Alessandra to help us being on this wonderful panel.
Thank you very much, Misha. So for all of you that have your cell phones with you, if you could kindly pull out your cell phone, we did have many questions with regards to, is this video going to be reposted so you could share it with your fellow board members or fellow managers. All three firms will be probably posting the video on their respective sites, but you can also follow our YouTube page by clicking on this QR code, and make sure you subscribe. We'll have the video up within 24 to 48 hours. We're always posting our webinars as well as weekly videos on educational information. I did want to thank Alessandra as well as Misha and their team that work behind the scenes to make this happen. I wanted to thank Ashley that works on my team to make this happen. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't look as great as we look on this video today. But more importantly, I wanted to take a moment to really, say a small prayer for those individuals that are there at the site with their families that are going through a very difficult time. We also want to thank those first responders that are, again, there throughout the world here, helping our community and helping out as best as they could. Thank you all for attending, all the board members and managers. It says a lot about your leadership, as well as your ability and want to, and desire to resolve the challenges in your community. If you have any further questions, don't hesitate to reach out to either of the organizations. We'll be glad to help in any way that we can. We hope to see you in our next webinar. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye.